I hope you can hear me and you can see the slides. Okay, so this paper is a joint paper with Clara Smith, professor in Argentina, University of La Plata. And in this paper, basically, we try to provide to answer these two research questions. The first is how to model legal procedures. It's not a new research issue, of course. And second, how to handle priorities in related decisions in legal procedures. The layout of the talk is we will give you the definition of what the legal procedure is in a broad sense. Then I will present syntax and semantics for representing and for modeling legal procedure. And then I will show a couple of actions and non-logical principles for modeling. So what's a legal procedure? I mean, a legal procedure, in fact, is very similar to a workflow. So you have actions, a first action, then you have some intermediate actions and claims and responses by the authorities, and we have a final answer. So in a very short, in a very concise way, we can say that the procedure is a final sequence of actions, and the start is a first claim by the plaintiff, for example. Then we have, as I said, intermediate claims, responses. So we have claims and responses by the authority, by the decision maker, which are called resolution. Then you may have priorities among the options in the procedure. Then we have a last action that leads to a so-called individual norm, which is the judgment. Right. So the language we use for modeling this, I mean, there are other languages that are in the literature. For example, I did myself some years ago with Guido Governatori work where we proposed a language for modeling compliance in business process modeling. And actually, this was an option, but we tried to use a different language. The language basically exploits propositional and dynamic logic in a multi-agent variant of that. And we add some specific constructor that was originally developed in another context for modeling the violation of norms, and that was embedded within the PDL. So PDL in the version we use, adopts these expressions. It's basically a model logic with actions within the box. So alpha IA means that every execution of action alpha by agent I from the present state leads to a state where A is true. And then we have constructors that are some of the user constructor of proposition dynamic logic. In particular, you can build procedures using actions, and then you can have complex actions that are composed by the sequence operator. So P1 and Pi1 and Pi2 are two procedures that you can combine them in a sequence or procedure. You can have a choice. So basically, you have that Pi1 is one option and Pi2 is another option. And then we can have the third option, which is the preference. So basically, you have two or more procedures or actions in the simplest case, and you can have a preference ordering among them, and you may have different preference ordering depending on the agent. So you may have a preference ordering for the plaintiff. Then it means that you have Pi1 is preferred over Pi2 according to the preference of the plaintiff, or you may have that the same as applied to the defendant in the case of the trial, and you can have a court as a preference ordering. So basically, you may have a number of different orders for each agent involved in the procedure. Typically, in the legal procedure, in trials, you may have defendant, plaintiff, and court. So the semantics is the semantics. So I will not spend time for giving the details. I would like just to draw your attention to the fact is the standard semantics for propositional and dynamic logic. So basically, you have a set of possible words, and you have a set of countable set of relations, each of them corresponding to an agent, and that you can have a way for defining complex procedures in a usual way. Then we have also the obligation. I will tell you more about that. And then you have a preference or a collection of strict partial orders over the set of the accessibility relations for the procedures. Then you have the model in a usual way, and then we have evaluations. The evaluation of formulae. So I just draw your attention to how to evaluate an expressional ID, that in the definition or the evaluation of an expression where you have pi1 all times I pi n, which means that you have pi1 as a first option, the first procedure, the first option in the first action preferred by agent I, but then you have pi2, pi3, pi4, pi up to pi n. And basically this is true if and only if you may have choice among them and you have a preference ordering coherent with the order of the pi of the different procedures in the box. So it's a very simple extension of PDL where you basically have a box where you have a preference among the different actions in the box operator. And this allows for capturing the order among options in a workflow. You basically have a parallel choice, and you may have an order between among the different options in the legal procedure. So, for example, suppose that we have this model, then you are in the state V, then we have different transitions. Transition correspond to the accessibility relation alpha pi, then mu d and beta p and gamma pi and gamma p, and then in this model, this expression is true, provided that you have a preference ordering where alpha p is preferred over beta p, and which is preferred over gamma p, and according to the p preference. You may have different preference order, one for each agent. Then I will show you a couple of reasoning principles. I'm going to finish. For example, we impose a so-called procedural consistency. So it's not possible that if pi1 is preferred according to the court over pi2, and this brings about A, this implies that you cannot have the opposite, the contrary, the opposite preference ordering for any other agent, right? Why? Because if the court establishes that pi1 should be preferred over pi2, then this means that we cannot, this is true and cannot be put in question by the other agents. But except for the court, you cannot have, you may definitely have that two different agents have different preferences. So in other words, in the workflow, the court decides the options, right? Can settle the options in case of opposite views. Then we have also this principle, which basically allows for combining different ordering. So suppose you have A preferred over B, alpha over beta and beta over gamma, and then you have beta preferred over phi, and then we have phi preferred over psi. Then you may compose that you can say that alpha is preferred over beta, which is preferred over, and then you have gamma or phi, and then you have psi. The final criterion, the principle, and then I think I'm going to finish my presentation, is called detachment of obligation. This is meaningful only with weaker version of the PDL, where you can tolerate conflicts. In fact, you may have that alpha is preferred over beta, and that produces A, but you know that there is one possible transition that leads to not A if the alpha is performed by the defendant, which means that we have a conflict but you can detach that the other option, beta, is obligatory. So at the end of the day, you have a way for deriving the obligation, provided that you have a sequence of preferences of the court. And the future work, and then I'm finished. I was mentioning the fact that we can have weaker logics. Actually, PDL is normal model logic, so it's would be interesting to explore a weaker version of this multi-agent PDL with the preference ordering, also the complexity issues. And of course, this work is preliminary in a sense that we just provided an idea, but still we have to check whether this language is adequate for modeling, for capturing several cases, and a significant number of cases of concrete application in the context of AI law. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Antonino Rotolo. And we have a question.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the approach regarding the construction of the presented procedure itself on your paper. Which are your future perspectives in the construction of the application on the proposed machinery? Also, how important the presented principles shall be considered when analyzing the model itself?
Okay, thanks for the question. Well, in fact, one easy way for exploring the concrete application would be to see analogous application of PDL in different contexts. I mean, from the computational point of view, and in developing possible concrete application, there is a huge literature on PDL as applied, for example, on the ontic logic, for example. So, in fact, this is a very simple extension of PDL. Well, simple, not technically, I think it would be tricky, but I don't think we are not so far away from the concrete application so far as the PDL was used, for example, in the ontic reasoning. So that the idea was to use PDL from the ontic reasoning into in the legal domain. And this precisely because the mathematical structure of PDL resemble very much to the structure of legal procedures. But so my first question is, we didn't so far too much, but I think there are a number of examples that we can draw from the literature on the ontic logic. And this has to do with the first question. Regarding the principle, we provided just a few principles, but those principles are not particularly. I mean, there is one principle that I would like to say cannot be abandoned, which is the first principle I propose to you, the fact that you cannot have inconsistency between in the case of defendant and plaintiff, between the plaintiff or the defendant and the court, because in the machinery we develop, basically the court is a way for superimposing and for solving possible conflict between the preferences of the different parties that are involved in the legal procedure. This, I think, the only principle that I would like not to abandon. The others are absolutely can be developed. And by the way, would be also very interesting to explore weaker version of PDL, which I think is an open question that I think is not yet explored in the literature enough.